So, hello everybody, welcome to the London Buddhist Centre. My name's Jayaka. In about 5 minutes time, in a few minutes time, we're going to be starting our class. I'll say more about that in a minute. But yeah, just welcome. Here we are in East London. The weather's been very good today. While we wait for more people to arrive, maybe it'd be nice to hear from some of you. Be nice for you to send us a message and we can let you know that we've got your message, and be good to maybe say a little bit about how you are even. What's the weather like where you are? What's the mind weather like where you are? So that we can hear what's going on out there. Yeah. So we'll just wait a few more minutes and we'll do a full introduction.
I've got a Stephen Mackin saying a warm welcome from Dundalk, Ireland.
Steve.
Yeah.
Hello Steve, in Ireland. Thanks for sending over a message.
And we've got Gurdeep tuning in from Port Talbot.
Who was that?
Gurdeep.
Gurdeep. Hi Gurdeep. Where's I'm getting messages from the tech team. I'm going to let you know who they are in a minute, but where's he from?
Gurdeep's a regular. He's from Port Talbot.
Port Talbot. Where's Port Talbot? Can you let us know, please, where Port Talbot is? We should know that, really. Can anybody else let us know where you're tuning in from? I know the name Port Talbot, but I don't know.
Wales.
It's in Wales, okay.
Oh.
Welcome from Wales. No, welcome if you're tuning in from Wales. That's it.
Yeah, Gurdeep's South Wales.
Okay, South Wales. That's good. No one else? Okay, so I think we'll make a start. Welcome again. My name's Jayaka. I'm here this evening with Prajnamanas. Prajnamanas is going to be talking about a figure called Vajrasattva this evening. We've been doing a series on what we call the Mandala of the 5 Buddhas. Vajrasattva makes the 6th Buddha, which we might try and explain later. Maybe we won't. We don't really need to worry about that too much. But we're looking at these archetypal Buddhas in the Buddhist tradition. So Vajrasattva will be talked about a bit later on. And also we've got Brita and Hiro behind the camera. They're operating the camera and reading your messages. So please keep the messages coming in. You can let us know where you're tuning in from, and there'll be an opportunity later to ask questions. We really do want your questions. It's really great because it gets the energy going in the room, and me and Prajnamanas will be answering your questions a bit later. So I think that's all I need to say for now. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, we're going to do a meditation firstly, as we always do with our classes, with our online classes and with our people classes when we can get people back into the shrine room, just so that we can arrive and settle and just make our mind a bit more supple so that we can be receptive to the Dharma when we start talking about it a bit later. When the mind becomes a bit more subtle, we can develop a bit more understanding, pick up the more subtle teachings. So make yourself comfortable. Please do sit on a chair or sit on the floor. And we're just going to do a bit of mindfulness of breathing. Don't worry if you've not done any meditation before, and a special welcome if it is your first time here, and welcome back if you've tuned in before. But don't worry, I'm going to lead us in the meditation to help us arrive more fully. So taking up your posture. And just take in a few deeper breaths so that you can really feel the breath travelling down into the body. And we're really trying to find a position, a posture where the breath can come into the body with ease and leave the body with ease. So just feeling the breath in your belly or your chest. And just feeling the quality of the breath. So maybe the breath feels a bit tense or the body feels a bit tense. So just trying to relax. And just making sure you're sitting straight. And in meditation, we should always be able to feel free to make very, very subtle adjustments as the meditation progresses. Again, just to keep the free passage of the breath. Because the clearer the passage of the breath, the more at ease we will feel. And if we've adjusted our posture and the breath still feels tense, then you can just imagine the breath going into those areas. So we breathe into the tension and we breathe out and let go. So there are physical tensions in the body and there are emotional tensions. And these can manifest as thoughts. So if your mind keeps thinking or throwing up thoughts, then just let them arise. And on the out breath, just trying to release them as well. So we'll do a simple 2-stage practice of the mindfulness of breathing. So I suggest doing the 3rd stage. If you know the practice, or if your mind is busy, you can do the 1st stage. So checking your posture, checking that you're not collapsing and restricting the breath. Feeling free to carry on what you're doing or moving on to the next stage. But really looking for the breath to refresh the body, refresh the mind. Feeling the ease of the breath. So bringing the meditation to a close. Letting go of what you're doing And when you're ready, opening your eyes. So, hope you enjoyed that meditation. I hope that helped you prepare for the Dharma, or the Dharma that we're going to be hearing this evening. So yeah, if you've enjoyed the meditation, please stay, and please stay for the rest of the evening. So I'm now going to hand over to Prajnamanas, who's going to be talking about the figure of Vajrasattva. So here's Prajnamanas.
Okay, hello everybody, good evening from me. Am I in about the right place? That way, okay. Like that? Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, yes, so very good to be with you. And thanks to Jayaka for a lovely introduction and little sit there. Here we are again, Monday evening. Our Mondays usually have more of a sort of explicitly Buddhist focus, although we do a bit of meditation as well. And on Monday evenings, in recent weeks, we've been looking at different Buddha figures, which are also different expressions of the enlightened mind, another way of seeing them. So we've been going through the Mandala of 5 Buddhas. And today, as Jayaka said, we're going to add a 6th Buddha. But yes, yeah, just to say that I appreciate being here and being able to speak to you. I live and work here at the London Buddhist Centre, so I probably take it a bit for granted being able to come to this shrine room. But I hope you've been able to drop into the shrine room now as well if you're local. We are open for some classes, although of course the bulk of our teaching still needs to be online. So hope you're well wherever you are and managing to keep up a thread of practice, and I hope we can help with that. Good. So, we've looked in the last 5 weeks at this mandala of 5 Buddhas, each of which has a different colour, a different animal, a different time of day, a different object that they hold, a different Buddha family, and so on and so on. It's a sort of panoply of colour and imagination, sort of a coloured, imaginative lens through which to see the mind of a Buddha, so that we can develop some relation to it a bit more easily. Because enlightenment, just on its own, can sound a bit abstract and a bit lofty and a bit far away and a bit like, what would it have to do with me? So through these archetypal Buddhas, as they're sometimes known, we can access things that do arouse our own kind of tastes and interests. For example, a few weeks ago I was talking about Amitabha, a deep red Buddha of meditation associated with love, an absorbed mind. His animal is the peacock. He has a wisdom of particularity that sees the difference between every single thing and every single being in its uniqueness. So we've been around the whole mandala, and like I say, today I'm adding a figure that in a way doesn't quite count as part of that, called Vajrasattva, in a kind of even more impressive, beautiful array of historical and archetypal figures called the Refuge Tree that we use in one of our meditation practices, where you have the Buddha Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha, in the middle, the recorded Dharma behind him, and so on, other kind of collections of figures around him. Above him is this mandala of 5 Buddhas, and right at the top is this figure I'm going to be talking about tonight, Vajrasattva. partly because Vajrasattva is said to be he's called the Adi Buddha in the tradition, and Adi means something like fundamental. Is also known as the primordial Buddha, so that's why he's right at the top of, and actually in a way not even part of, this refuge tree. It's that he's outside time. So one of the things Vajrasattva represents is the fact that consciousness is not subject to time. So awareness in its purest form is not a phenomenon subject to the same laws as ordinary physics and day-to-day goings on. It's something, hard to define, but that stands outside of all of that. In fact, just to complete that thought briefly, I think we experience time as we're conscious, and then we experience time. Other way around. I'm going to confuse myself. We think there's time out there, so the history of the world, and we're born and we die and so on. And within that, we have a consciousness that arises. We're aware of things for a certain amount of time, and then after we're no longer alive, we can't be anymore. Buddhism is putting it the other way around and saying consciousness is actually the fundamental element in which everything else moves. And so time is something we experience because everything is in the end made of consciousness or mind. So there we are. That was supposed to be a little sort of taster of ultimate reality from the point of view of the Buddhist tradition, but I slightly tripped myself up. So Vajrasattva is a beautiful white figure who sits right at the top of or above this refuge tree, said to be the colour of sunlight on snow. So it's a white colour, but a glinting golden sort of white. Also white because associated with purity. So, perhaps I'll say a little bit about this later. But just as a sort of taster, purity can have, mistaken or unpleasant connotations these days. It's not a very common word, pure or purity. Probably it got bad press in the last couple of centuries for various reasons, but you could think of this quality of purity of mind that Vajrasattva represents, and that bringing him to mind helps us to cultivate, as a quality of our awareness, our consciousness, being unadulterated or undiluted by any other elements, or at its full strength. So you talk about pure alcohol, for example, having nothing else in it, and being completely concentrated or essentialized. So this quality of purity of mind has the same positive connotation. And the other meaning of purity could be that something is fresh or new, like the mind is, after we've cleansed it of our unskillful deeds, so things that we've done that we regret, or anything that's clouding our awareness, even a sort of busy, complicated mind, but especially things we've done that we're not proud of. After we've done what we need to do to sort of purify our minds of those things that are sort of dirtying it almost, you could say that the mind attains or re-attains a kind of purity, and it's a kind of new or fresh mind as well. I meant to say at the beginning, by the way, if you've got questions about what I say, do be thinking them up already, and you could type them already actually in the chat box with a capital Q on the front. I won't get to them until Jayaka and I will answer any questions you've got or discuss them later. But you could already be thinking what your questions might be if you have them. Meant to say that right at the front. Okay. So this quality of purity is also Vajrasattva representing our true nature. There's another point about the purity. So in this view, it's quite a hard thing to grasp. The Buddhist tradition sees the mind ultimately as pure or clear of obscurations, obstacles, cloudedness, complications. It sees our awareness in its in its primordial state, before it has become entangled in the doings and the goings on that happen within time. So our life and all its sort of attachments and aversions and so on, it sees that consciousness as completely pure. So it would say that that purity, as I'm calling it, is actually our essential nature and something that we need to get back to. So even that already might seem quite an unusual way of seeing things. I think it clashes with certain other worldviews. Maybe we come into this life already with certain, propensities or unresolved hankerings, things that we're opposed to. But certainly during the time span of our life, we pick up a lot of views and opinions. We become sort of acculturated, absorb the worldview that's around us usually. And this teaching on purity is saying that all of that, in a sense, is added on, and the mind in its original state doesn't come with any of it. So this has got an important kind of emotional connotation before this is starting to sound too metaphysical, which I'll come on to in a moment, something important in our day-to-day lives. But bearing Vajrasattva in mind and, doing the meditation practice that has Vajrasattva at its centre is for restoring us to this, as close as we can get within one meditation session, to this sense that our true nature is actually unsullied by all of the complications that the mind creates. So the implication I mentioned it's got for us is that, it's to do with guilt. Vajrasattva is particularly associated with making guilt vanish, so purifying us of not just our guilt, but any notion of it. So he's associated with confession, which has a particular sort of meaning in Buddhism and isn't the same as confession as you might have come across it in a Christian context, for example. And again, actually, is only a sort of day-to-day step on the longer path towards this essential Vajrasattva nature. So confession in the Buddhist context is to do with removing blockages we've brought into our minds by our harmful actions. We usually just call them unskillful actions, and that just means anything we've done with our body, our speech, or our mind that goes in some way against other living beings and the sort of the uniqueness and value and preciousness of other living beings. So basically doing harm in any way. So any unskillful actions that we've done hinder our ability to grow in Buddhism. And by confessing them, which usually just means speaking them out to friends that share our values and can take seriously what we're saying and neither punish us for it nor brush it off as irrelevant, but actually take seriously that we are confronting an ethical matter in ourselves. Through that Buddhist practice of confession, it's not to remind ourselves that we're miserable sinners. It's to remove the blockage, feel lighter, and continue on that path of growth unhindered. Sometimes I think we even ought to be able to forget things we've confessed, so lightened are we of their influence. Of course, you've got to take that with a pinch of salt. If we've done something definitely harmful, of course, it would be worth remembering that enough to learn from it. So yeah, Vajrasattva particularly associated with confession. But another reason for that is that, well, that clouding or blocking of the mind that I'm mentioning in relation to unskillful acts in Buddhism has nothing to do with guilt also. So guilt in Buddhism is just completely unhelpful. It has no real place. In fact, it is another of those blockages. So the guilt will usually be to do with clinging to some view of ourselves, either that we're ultimately bad, or that we need to be ultimately good, therefore we can't let in any suggestion that we might have done something where people think we're bad, if you see what I mean. That state is, well, a guilty one. And guilt will hinder or block our growth. And Vajrasattva, I think, helps us to see that there's ultimately no stain on our being. So I've really sort of dived in here. I know I'm using quite sort of big terms. It's quite an ambitious subject. I don't know if I can quite cover it all, but there we are. So, and don't worry exactly about the particular words I'm using. It's really about the message behind it. Vajrasattva is saying, in your true nature, you were always pure. So no badness needs to actually attach itself to you or your identity. That is actually a mistaken view. So if you think of yourself as bad, and we can end up in that view having started legitimately by regretting something harmful, if you see what I mean. If we have had a habit of speaking harshly, say, we may have done harm to other people, but the wrong view will be developing the idea that we can't shake that habit, we're stuck with it, and we're therefore stuck with some sort of badness in ourself. I think guilt can have other sort of subtler negative effects as well, which include making us immune to criticism. So if I'm guilty, always talking myself down and feel awful about my slightest mistakes, there isn't really any space for others to criticise me. I'm doing it all myself already, so I won't be able to tolerate them doing that. And I think there's even an Oscar Wilde quote about as long as I'm guilty, other people can't do that for me or can't criticise me. And I think that's somewhere I've been, actually, speaking personally. I think I've been so afraid of an idea that I might be thought bad, and I fear that so much that I'm not actually, or I think at a certain time in my life, wasn't actually open to assessing my own actions as to positive, negative, skillful, unskillful, without identifying with them, which is always the problem. You may have noticed if you do something generous, especially if it was spontaneous, quite quickly the mind comes in and starts identifying you with the act. So if you just do something really helpful, it's very tempting to start to just start viewing yourself in that way. I'm trying to think of an example. I once found somebody on a traffic island, so between lanes of a main road, who had got stuck there. They were elderly and very, very afraid, and not in enough. Well, they were dressed for summer, and it was December. So I helped this woman sort of get home, and I paid her 1 or 2 visits afterwards as well, in the weeks following that. And of course, I haven't told the story in a long time, but I was quite tempted to tell people the story and start seeing myself as someone who actually does that kind of thing kind of all the time, but I've just been busy with other things or whatever it is. That identifying with something is something we're adding on to the sort of, the spontaneity or the connectedness of the skillful act. It's very easy to do. So, a guilty mind is afraid not to identify with a good thing, and identifies with the bad thing, partly because it's an easier sort of identity. Anyway, so Vajrasattva is saying, not only do you not need that, Vajrasattva is even known for having no notion of guilt. So it's not that we've done something we're not proud of, we bring Vajrasattva to mind and he forgives us like like the Christian God might. It's that he is so loving and open and has such a pure mind with regard to us that we realise there could have been no possibility of our guilt in the first place. So it's a reminder of something much deeper and that goes way beyond the personal as well. Something to watch out for, I think, with guilt is that it reinforces a fixed and separate personhood. So guilt really reinforces an ego identity, actually, even if it's painful, that might be convenient to us. And Vajrasattva is just making all of that vanish in his sort of clear white glow, also associated with reality itself. So his mind dwells in reality itself, and we realise if we bring our mind close enough to that Vajrasattva nature, that our own mind, like I'm saying, in its essential nature is actually pure. So all those wrong notions disappear, as well as the attachments to skillful or unskillful deeds that we might have fallen into. Okay. So, perhaps a little story now. Because Vajrasattva is associated with that sort of alienation from our true nature, he's also associated with a story from the Buddhist tradition that illustrates that very well. So that we're alienated from our true nature and need to return to it. The story is called The Myth of the Return Journey, and it's told apparently by the Buddha in the midst of a long discourse he gave called the White Lotus Sutra, so a Mahayana Sutra, probably one of the most famous Mahayana sutras. And in the myth of the return journey, a rich man's son goes travelling. For many years he travels far and wide in other countries, earning his bread and doing what he needs to do to get by, often moving around, not settling, doing whatever work he needs to do, roaming and rambling for many, many years. So many years later, by accident, he actually comes into the country that his father, a very, very wealthy nobleman, has moved to. So he doesn't think he's going home. So he comes across this huge ornate palace with all its wealth displayed, hundreds of staff running everywhere, managing gardens and buildings, and people coming to see the nobleman, ask his advice, lots of stores of grain and everything else. And he's amidst this crowd, the son, the long alienated son having travelled, and the father spots him. Okay, so the father recognises the son, but not the other way around. So the son doesn't know that he's in his father's domain. He thinks he's just in yet another country, looking for work all over again. And the father sends some of his attendants after the younger man. So says, "Bring that young man to me." So the attendants go after him, but the son escapes. Actually, he passes out and loses consciousness. But it seems that he's afraid of people in decent clothing who work for the nobleman. And it looks as though he's afraid of wealth and riches. So the father, they go home, tell the father, their boss, this story. And the father thinks a bit more about how to reunite himself with his son, who he realises has become afraid of all of the wealth and riches that he originally came from. So he has an idea and thinks, okay, and a few more attendants, some different ones, let's say. He says, dress down, dress really casual, put on some dirty clothes, go and find him and offer him some really simple work on the edge of the grounds. And that attempt succeeds. So this is more what the son is used to. And he's invited to muck out a huge stables. So he's got to shovel huge heaps of dung, which is more what he's used to. So he accepts. So over the weeks and months, the son works well, eventually becomes a bit more familiar with all the staff of this grand property, and starts getting promoted. So the father discreetly keeps track of his progress and says, okay, next he can saddle the elephants. I don't know. Gives him a job a bit better than mucking out the stables. And by, through having sort of slightly more responsible roles, slightly closer to the palace, the son eventually becomes the steward of the estate, and is quite familiar with the palace and goes in and out of it for his daily work now. Takes over the management of the whole place and its staff and all the animals and so on. And starts to come into relationship to the father, so he's no longer afraid. So the father gradually trusts him, or entrusts to him more and more of the responsibility. And the son sort of grows in confidence, ability, willingness to sort of show his face, all of that. And then eventually, when the father is dying, he calls the steward, his son, to him and, unveils the truth of the situation, says, actually, you're my son. In fact, all of this, it's not just you that manages it, it's actually yours. The son accepts and inherits all of this, all of the wealth that he's due. So really what that's a story of, rather than material riches and wealth, is the riches and wealth of the enlightened mind that the son has become alienated from, like this pure, essential, unsullied awareness that's our true nature, that we become alienated from. And he needs to gradually come into relationship to it, gradually step closer to it, and then actually inherit these riches, you could say, of returning to that pure nature, or you could say of ascending all the way to the enlightened mind of a Buddha. So that's the myth of the return journey, and that's a few things about Vajrasattva and his associations. There'll be time to go into some of this more, and Jayaka will be sharing his thoughts as well. We'll both be back on shortly to talk more about the subject. But first we'll do a little meditation. So just to sort of come out of the discursive mode again, we'll do another short sit, which I'll lead. Then we'll have a brief leg stretch, and then hear your questions. So what we'll do is carry on as before with the third stage of the mindfulness of breathing, where we just follow the breath all the way in and all the way out. But just see if you can get a tiny little taste of what the mind is like when it's not entangled. And that clarity or even light in the mind might be something more like our true nature. So just settling again into your posture. Feeling the breath come and go. Just relaxing the shoulders and the belly. Relaxing the face. Just see if you can feel the relief of this simple experience of following the breath. With a mind that, in its true state, is vivid and alive. So just see if you can gently put down any complications your mind is adding to your experience. And feel the breath come and go from the body. So letting the mind completely relax now. and opening your eyes and coming out of the meditation. Okay, so we'll take a short break now, stretch our legs, get a drink of water, whatever you need to do, and we'll be back just after 5 to discuss this a bit more and take any questions you've got. So if you've got questions, just be typing them already if you like. Capital Q on the front and then your question in the chat box. And look forward to talking more in a few minutes.
Okay, thanks very much, Prajnamanas. So, my name's Jaika, if you've not seen me yet. Prajnamanas has just given a bit of a presentation on Vajrasattva, which is a Buddha. He's been describing the figure. We're hearing there's some good questions coming through. We're going to try and manage those in a minute. Is there any more you want to say about Vajrasattva? Is there anything before we go into the questions?
Well, I only wish that we had an image of Vajrasattva actually, because really these figures are partly just about beauty. Maybe it's enough to say that actually, that some of the things I'm saying are quite sort of psychological and emotional, but really these figures are to do with beauty and becoming reconciled with or joining in our consciousness with something very, very beautiful. And the sadhana practices that we do as order members, of which Vajrasattva is one, are very much to do with connecting with that, aren't they? So do look at an image of Vajrasattva if you have a chance. That's much of the idea. So you can say lots of things, which I have done, but really it's an image for something. And that in that form can be much more powerful than anything conceptual, we might say.
Because Vajrasattva is sitting on a white lotus, a white moon mat, and he also holds some important implements, and also he wears a crown. And in the crown he's got the five colours of the five jnanas, the five Buddhas. As Prajnamanas was saying earlier, he's associated with those. So a really important image to look at actually, and it is a symbol. So when you reflect on a symbol, there's kind of infinite depths. You can never get to the bottom of a symbol, and when you meditate on these particular figures over a period of time, period of years, they start to reveal more truth to you. So do look at a figure and see what happens. So I think let's have some questions, shall we?
Let's do it.
So Hiral's collecting the questions.
Great. So
let's
we've got
go.
a question from Mircea, who says, "What is consciousness and how does it relate to our true nature?"
So it's just a little
Do we wanna-
start. Just a
do we
little
wanna start
starter
with
for
that
you.
one?
Yeah. Just
We'll warm up a little
just
bit.
to warm up. Yeah. What is consciousness?
What is consciousness and how does it relate to our pure nature?
Yes.
I think that's the big question, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
You've hit on the big question. I think that's what Buddhism is actually trying to explore. What does the Buddhist tradition say? I don't think it says. It doesn't actually try to say what it is. I think it just tries to say we'll explore it, meditate on it. Are we going to have time to do any meditation at the end of this session? We're not, are we?
No.
Because one way of exploring it is in meditation. It is a very, very difficult question. I mean, I can only try to explain it through meditation. Is that when you're in meditation, if you try to... There's usually two things that are happening, I find. I mean, there's usually more, but two main things I've described now is that there's the mind that is kind of caught up with emotions and thoughts and so on. That's the kind of mind that we're talking is kind of the sullied mind. But as you sit and meditate, you start to notice something else. So there's something else in your mind that isn't contaminated in that way, and it can feel very spacious and very beautiful. And in meditation, if you start to focus on that can start to grow, and all this, if you like, the sullied mind starts to weaken, or it can do, particularly if you're on retreat and you're doing long periods of meditation. And that kind of starts to reveal what kind of consciousness is really. I can't think of much else to say. It's an experiential thing, and we can all touch on it in meditation. I don't know what else. Is there anything else to add to that?
I think you've said it well in that what consciousness is the main puzzle we're trying to puzzle out. And that different Buddhist schools have got different views of what consciousness is, I think. So some Buddhist schools think that everything we experience is made of consciousness and that there is only mind. So there's a school called Chittamatra, for example, which means mind only. Another view would say that consciousness and the objects of consciousness are dependent on each other like two sheaves of wheat leaning together, and that if one falls, the other will too, that they need each other to exist. So it's some sort of primary element of reality that I don't think you can come out of, if you see what I mean. I don't think you can get round it. I think you can be unconscious, but you're still in some relationship to consciousness, if you see what I mean. So the Buddhist view of consciousness, I suppose we could say, is definitely not the materialist one, where you have solid matter out here and a conscious being able to apprehend it. In other words, a sort of dead world with some alive creatures walking around on the surface of it. It would say that consciousness is a sort of attribute of all experience. So, if we wanted to draw a day-to-day implication from that, we'd say that all of your possible experience is mediated by your consciousness. So that's at least how important it is that a positive, and eventually using these terms of the Vajrasattva sort of terrain, positive and even pure consciousness or mind, will yield a sort of world that has those attributes as well, will produce that sort of experience. So I think that's important to say too. So it's not just that consciousness experiences phenomena which are out there. There's a consciousness in here experiencing phenomena out there. Consciousness actually produces the phenomena as well. Hard to say where the line is, but the first lines of one of the oldest Buddhist scriptures, the Dhammapada, goes, if I'm not wrong, consciousness is preceded by mind, experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, produced by mind. So that's saying mind is creating your experience. That's how fundamental consciousness is in Buddhism, at least.
I think one other thing that was coming to mind while you were speaking was that, in a way, consciousness, that there's enlightened consciousness and there's unenlightened consciousness, and what we've been talking about is enlightened consciousness. So, if we want to know what real fundamental consciousness is, then maybe it's the Buddha. Maybe it manifests as the Buddha. And unenlightened consciousness, well, I'm unenlightened, and I think practically everybody that I know is unenlightened. So I think we can see consciousness in both those kinds of ways, more experientially. So if we learn about the Buddha, if we learn about the Buddha's life, or we learn about these archetypal Buddhas, then we start to understand what consciousness really is. Shall we move on to the next question? Hiro.
So I've got a question from Sed, who asks, could you say something on the difference between guilt and shame or remorse?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Go on, you
Okay.
have a shot.
All right. Yeah, great. Okay, so Sed asks something on the difference between guilt and remorse. Sed or Seb?
Sed.
Sed, I did say it right. Anyway, thank you, Sed. Guilt versus remorse. Yeah, very, very important distinction. Thank you for asking. I talked about guilt in my talk. I didn't talk about remorse. So guilt would be, well, I'll talk about it in one particular way. You could bring out a few other things. Guilt has some strong self-identification in it. So this is what I was saying in the talk, that you can over-identify with, well, actually, you could get guilty even over something that isn't harmful. You could feel bad for, I don't know, having red hair or something. but certainly also something that you have done that's harmed somebody, you could feel guilty and sort of blame yourself and start to develop a view that ultimately you are bad on the basis of that. And you're tying yourself up with a behaviour all the time and making something about it essential to you wrongly. Okay, so remorse, on the other hand, has more movement in it. Remorse is a positive mental state, by the way. It's uncomfortable but positive in the Buddhist tradition, and that involves seeing and recognising an unskillful act and feeling some pain on account of that, some regret basically. Remorse is where you do something, you're not proud of it, you wish you hadn't, you feel you could and ought to have done better, and you recognise that, have a healthy attitude to it, a sort of frank admission of it. You don't exaggerate or underplay its importance. You face up to the fact that that's what you've done, speak it out to some spiritual friends, and feel the lightening effect of that, especially as you resolve to do better next time or not fall into that again. And I think it's important to bring this out because in trying to escape guilt, sometimes we sort of leapfrog over remorse and get away from both of them, and want not to sort of, quotes, feel bad about anything. And I think that can start to produce a view that you don't need to regret anything. A teacher of mine said, who's led retreats I've been on, said, people like to tell me they don't have any regrets, and I find that very odd, because if you're saying you don't have any regrets, you're really saying you've never done something you weren't proud of. You know, that just can't be true. Anyway, that might be a little manifestation of trying to get away from, doing away with remorse because we're trying to get away from guilt, which obviously is painful, unhelpful, slightly sort of addictive, and actually blocks our communication with others as well as creating a negative view of ourselves.
So I think when I think about this, I think about a kind of, guilt is a kind of a neurotic emotion, and if I'm feeling guilty in the neurotic sense, it's if I've done something, it's all about me still. It's me trying to defend myself, trying to get out of it, trying to make excuses. That's unskillful. That's an unskillful guilt. But remorse, which I think what you're talking about in a positive sense, my experience is that yes, I've acted unskillfully, but it becomes about other people, and it becomes about making a confession, giving expression to that, and making amends as well. So I think, in terms of it being a positive state of mind, there needs to be an attempt to make an amends if that's possible. So for me, that's the distinction. Sometimes I like to think about both of those mental states as neurotic guilt or healthy guilt. That's kind of how I think about it. Instead of talking about remorse and
versus
guilt. And for most people, I think they feel like the same thing experientially. But when you start to look at the mind, I think that's the distinction for me anyway. When if it's about me, it's unskillful. If it's about them and making amends, it's skillful.
Yeah, I think that's right. A hallmark of remorse or healthy guilt, as I think you're calling it, is that you're thinking about another person and what they might need or what you might need to say to them or how you might alleviate suffering of theirs, even in relation to an act of your own. So you've got somebody else in mind. That's good.
Should we move on? Have we got some more?
Yeah, so I've got something written by Sophie. Sophie's essentially asking, how do you navigate through the fear that others might criticise you? How would you overcome that?
How do you navigate through that fear?
A few things are coming to mind. But we could reflect that we've usually been critical ourselves. That could be a start, couldn't it? And take on ourself that we've done that. Maybe we've been rightly critical or constructively critical as well. I mean, I think that's another important distinction. I notice actually that being critical or criticising sounds necessarily negative in the way the word's used today. I mean, maybe we need another rectification of terms here for me to get this across. But I mean, in a way, the mind is critical all the time. A critical mind notices, a dirty sink and thinks, I want that to be clean, and, does something about it. A critical mind, reads about how our government's responding to lockdown and thinks, I would have done it a bit differently. I think sometimes when we talk about people criticising each other, we might be talking about harshness, actually, or dismissiveness, or something that negates or seems to negate the whole person rather than something that they've done. So what I try to, I think it's very relevant to the remorse guilt distinction, because what I try to do if friends have constructive criticism for me is try to remember that they are not writing me off. So another way of saying that is trying not to take it personally. But I myself may have done something that they want to say, I don't think that's the right way to go about that, or I don't think that was great what you did there. Make sure not to hear it as them saying, you're really, in yourself, really not great, and I really don't think you're kind of the right sort. And it's funny how I think as you start to sort of train in these distinctions, you can start to see when one is happening instead of the other. It's easier to see in others than it is in ourselves. Reaction to other people's criticism quite often will be because on some level we're taking it personally. But yeah, I think moving away from the fear of being criticised would be to understand that if our behaviour is not perfect, it must be worthy of some level of criticism. And that we presumably have that sort of relationship to others unless we find them perfect, which, is probably to some extent a mistake. Got any thoughts?
Is it Sophie? Yeah, Sophie. It's frightening, isn't it, when people criticise us? So we probably are going to feel frightened when people criticise us. I think for me, when people do that, I try to, I've experienced a lot of fear in the past. I mean, I still do experience fear sometimes when I'm criticised, but I think these days I try to listen, and because the fear can just block the communication. And I know for me, fear is an instinct, and when the instincts kick in, as animals, we're supposed to be running away or fighting, so we're not in that listening mode. So I think it takes quite a bit of skill to learn how to listen. So I think it's important to listen, because there may be some valid criticism. We're not, I'm worthy of criticism. We all are at times. So I think it's important if we try to be open to it, and then we just try to discern what the truth is. So if things are true, I try to practice. If something's true and there's a criticism, is try not to defend it, and just try to be open to the fact that I may have done something unhelpful or been unpleasant towards somebody. So I think that's important. So if we enter into a communication, we're willing to listen. I think what happens over time is that, as with lots of situations where we experience fear, we just get used to experiencing the fear. And in a way, we're less frightened of the fear. It just becomes, okay, there it is. But I need to listen and engage. So, and out of that grows a confidence. And then as we grow with confidence, we get more able to engage in difficult communications. And then, of course, confidence grows. So I think often when we're frightened of criticism, it is a question of confidence and how we build up our confidence and feeling confident in who we are. So there will be unskillful things, but there'll be lots of good things about as well. We're a mix of things, and that's what we have to try to hold. Often when we hear criticism from other people, it contradicts the view of ourselves, and that's what we need to learn how to hold, create a container that we can hold that in, and then I think we gradually, the fear lessens. So, should we go to the next question?
Yeah, let's have
Yeah.
one more, yeah.
We don't have any more for the time being.
Aha.
We don't have any more questions. So, just trying to come back to some of the things that you were saying. So how do we connect with this purity then? This purity of consciousness. You think, how can we get a taste of that, and as it sort of bring it out of an abstract sort of context? How can we do that?
Well, I think a bit as I was suggesting in the meditation, I think you can taste a simpler, clearer mind, moment to moment in meditation, and that gives you a hint of what the mind might be like without any overlayering onto its original sort of bright, clear state. So I suppose you'd work in meditation particularly to notice and appreciate what the mind is like, but also how it feels, so what your whole experience is like when the mind quietens. So if the mind is gnawing away at some irritation or planning, and there's tension in the body, and we're doing that clenching thing that we do, as soon as we realise that's happened, we'll, in those moments, have quite a lot of cues that we can take from our experience that are quite simple. It can feel quite bright, quite confident, uncomplicated, and I suppose you can start to imagine that as you went on meditating and removing wrong or unhelpful views and purifying your consciousness, to use that word, as you tread the path of Buddhism and meditation, you'd start to join the dots of those moments. Those dots would grow into sort of pools and islands, and eventually your mind would start becoming more like that more and more of the time, until it no longer made use of anything it didn't need to make use of. It no longer filled itself with anything unnecessary or secondary to the question in hand, the person in front of you, the beauty of anything really. I mean, an enlightened mind is said to be able to sort of dwell in bliss, whatever is happening. So that, I think, is the sort of maximum expression of that thing we're tasting in meditation.
And what about time? Because you were saying some interesting things about time. Because I experience time as a burden. Boy, I'd like to be free of that sense of time.
Why is that?
Well, because it feels constricting, and I worry about things maybe from the past or what's going to happen in the future. And if I could be free of that, then that would be very good. I mean, I've had a kind of an experience of that in meditation, where maybe we've all had an experience of this, where you kind of, things seem to fall away, and then time seems kind of unimportant, or actually, I don't know how long I've been meditating for, and it's quite enjoyable. And I think that's probably the closest I've got to it. But I also think that relates to, when we've got a clear conscience, and the mind becomes more subtle, doesn't it? And then I think it can taste those more subtle things that we're trying to talk about. But I always find that area very, very interesting about time, and space as well, because again, in meditation, space seems to change, space and time seem to change. So they're definitely affected by my stream of consciousness and what state of mind I'm in.
Well, I think you've touched on two really important qualities of Vajrasattva there. One, the sort of refreshment and beauty even of a clear conscience and the sort of freshness towards the world that brings, but also this deeper kind of metaphysical matter that helps us touch something that might be outside time. But I like what you said particularly about time being unimportant. I mean, what a great kind of first step, you know. Time otherwise is so important, isn't it? Our day is split into tiny units and you sort of seem to never escape from it. But I think even the fact that time seems to expand and contract according to our experience shows that time is actually secondary to consciousness. Really our conscious experience is what's happening. And time is a sort of abstraction we've come up with to kind of count it and split it into units. So yeah, great thing to be free of. I'm going on solitary retreat on Friday, and that's sort of classic moment for people to feel a bit freer of time. But I think that starts with being more in touch with just the flow of days and nights and the fact that just keeps rolling. Whatever we're thinking about it, you know, whatever units we're splitting it into. But also just to sort of have your experience flow a little bit more and do things because they seem the right thing to do next rather than doing things because it's 1 o'clock or 5 o'clock. So yeah, very important, I think.
Should we? Is that time?
I think that's time. You were trying to find a way around that, weren't you? Yeah. It being 8:24, it's time to bring the class to a close. So just a few other things first. What we'll do to close the class is, we'll recite a traditional verse called the Transference of Merit and Self-Surrender. So I'll read these lines that are the expression of an enlightened mind, dedicating any benefit of anything we've done or thought this evening or at any other time actually to the benefit of others. And I'll then chant Vajrasattva's name. So I'll just chant Om Vajrasattva Hum, which is a way of calling to this figure and kind of calling on Vajrasattva's help. So saying, I want to return to this true nature. I need the help of this figure. I need this sort of beauty. I need this freedom from a constrained, guilty, complicated mind. And we'll make offerings to the shrine. So we'll sort of seal or mark that or set forth that intention by offering some incense to the shrine here. You could do the same if you've got a shrine at home. Britta and Hyrule will do the same, and then we will turn out the lights and say goodnight. So one more thing before we do that, which is to do with how we run our activities here and the sort of spirit we're trying to encourage, which is a spirit or even a culture of generosity. So Jayaka and I and Britta and Hyrule behind the camera, we offer our time for free for these classes because it's just something we want to do. We want to share our practice. So we do that for free. We're not paid. But of course it does take money to keep up our buildings, administrate the whole of the Buddhist Centre's operations. So we would really benefit from donations you're able to make. Hyrule will post a link now. You could just give £10 for this class if you feel moved to, if it's had some positive effect on you. You could even take out a standing order. That would particularly help our work if you gave regularly. There are other ways to give, so you don't have to give us money. It's not a charge. The class is completely free. But we really do benefit from donations. People are given so generously in the lockdown. We're really, really grateful for it. Very touched and very grateful, and hope that at least some of you will be able to continue giving. So thank you very much for that. Just follow the link Hiral's posting if you want to give. And I think now we'll turn the lights down, and this verse, the transference of merit and self-surrender, I'll just read the lines. The other three here will repeat, and you can repeat at home. And then I'll start this mantra to Vajrasattva. So just join in with that chanting as well, if you like. So just sitting in your meditation posture again for a few minutes. Transference of merit and self-surrender. Then call and response. May the merit gained.
May the merit gained
In my acting thus.
in my acting thus
Go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
My personality throughout my existences.
My personality throughout my existences.
My possessions.
My possessions.
And my merit in all three ways.
And my merit in all three ways.
I give up without regard to myself.
I give up without regard to myself.
For the benefit of all beings.
For the benefit of all beings.
Just as the earth and other elements.
Just as the earth and other elements
Are serviceable in many ways.
are serviceable in many ways.
To the infinite number of beings.
To the infinite number of beings.
Inhabiting limitless space.
Inhabiting limitless space.
So may I become.
So may I become
That which maintains all beings.
that which maintains all beings.
Situated throughout space.
Situated throughout space.
So long as all have not attained
So long as all have not attained
to peace.
to peace.
Om Vajrasattva Om. 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 Om Vajrasattva Om.